Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry for the late start, but we wanted to make sure everybody who could attend is here. We have a bunch of people online. So we are today having an HSIP work session for AMATS. So as a reminder, this is a work session. No actual action can be taken. This is an opportunity for the committee members to discuss and talk amongst themselves. The plan here is to have a presentation from DOT. We have a good group of people here. They have a nice presentation for you to have help leading or starting the discussion off. Then we're going to have quick info from AMAT staff on some work we did for some recommended areas to look at for possible nominations. And then it'll be discussion time. And the outcome for this meeting today is see if there's anything that we want to bring forward in May or April, May. To the TAC and Policy Committee for nominations for what you guys would like to approve as a recommendation to send forward for nominations. Just as a reminder, even if it's approved in May for nominations, it still has to go through a very lengthy process and a lot of work that has to be done on the back end. So don't assume that just because it's approved in May means it will go forward the next day. There's a lot of work that has to be done by staff all around. So just kind of keep that in mind and set your expectations for that. So it's a little free form today. Just remember, it's really for the committee members. It's not an opportunity for the public to testify or really give comment. So just kind of keep that in mind. So we also have a lot of staff here as well from DOT and the Muni and AMATS if you guys have any questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to DOT. Thank you.
My name is Christine Langley. I am the Data Modernization and Innovation Director for the department. And as part of that, I help sync up the data with our safety programs. And so today we're going to go over our HSIP program, and we're going to talk about some of the changes that we're bringing to the table. This might look a little bit different than you've seen in the past from DOT. We're going to talk about what that timeline looks like, how the funding for HSIP projects comes out, and why it's different than a lot of the standard projects that you see from the department. And then we're going to go through a lot of the data that we have been bringing to the table. Some of this you'll recognize, some of it's new, but it's an effort on the department's behalf to start saying, okay, we hear that inherent knowledge that all of us have on our transportation routes, what we see, what we hear from our neighbors and our friends, and then what does the data show us on top of that? And while none of these data sets is the absolute answer for us, it's a way for us to increase our institutional knowledge overall. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Pam Golden. Pam Golden is the head of our Highway Safety Office in the department and our statewide traffic and safety engineer.
Hi, I think most of you know me or been in and around plenty of meetings. And I was here last year with Anna doing the same thing. So it's gonna work, right?
I swear
my nose
earlier.
In.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Now it's really.
Thank you.
So hold on, I gotta preview this. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk about what's different as the Highway Safety Office now than what you've maybe heard of the Highway Safety Office called. Going over the HSIP, this is all the things Aaron covered, you know, how we fund and select the locations that screened. You will find that they look remarkably like the high crash network that map that was here. We all know the roads we're going to be talking about for sure. And then talk about some other resources before we get in discussion. So the Highway Safety Office used to be what you think of as our behavioral safety side. In this new budget, the Highway Safety Office is not only the behavioral safety side, which covers the NHTSA grants, but also our Highway Safety Improvement Program, the traditional traffic and safety duties like the Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices, Alaska Traffic Manual, as well as our TSMO program, which is covers our intelligent transportation system stuff, our avalanche program, and 511 road weather, that sort of stuff. So we were combined to really make sure we're getting all this information together, but also sort of improving our collaboration between these programs and with other entities. First, no good safety presentation without highlighting the safe system approach. It's the foundation of our strategic highway safety plan. Our goal is 0 by 2050, 0 fatalities. And it's going to take some work. I believe AMATS actually set their target as 0. Did you correct? Or you set your target as 0 at this last time, did you? Correct?
Not the target itself is 0 for 26, but the idea was heading towards 0 by 2050, I believe. So matching in line with you guys.
If anybody doesn't know, the Highway Safety Improvement Program is targeted on reducing the fatal and serious injury crashes and the risk of fatal and serious injury crashes. So it's historically been quite reactive. We're trying to figure out ways to make it more proactive. And that's what some of this new data might help us with. It's required to be a data-driven program. And we are the only program that is required to evaluate how we do on a cost effectiveness scale. So when we're looking at a countermeasure, you'll hear us say, well, that's a 29% crash reduction. And then 3 years after the project is complete, we go back and see how did we do. And then we have to report that in our annual report to Federal Highways. Our funding, and I want to cover this just because it gets a little tricky when we say penalty funds, what is sometimes thought of as a penalty fund. So we have the railroad safety money, which is a little over $1 million a year. It's not much in Alaska. We have our Highway Safety Improvement Program funds, which are spelled out in what Alaska gets. It's in the 45 million-ish range. Then we have penalty funding. Penalty funding is actually what is transferred to us from the Highway Safety Office because we do not have a repeat offender law or a open container law that matches what the federal government suggests. So our regular program is penalized. It's intended to go towards programs that seek to address that issue. That's a lot of money that would have to be spent on those programs. So the Highway Safety Office, the behavioral side, keeps the small amount of it that goes actually towards the drug impaired driving unit here in Anchorage. And then the rest of it, to the tune of about 26 million, is transferred over to be used for Highway Safety Improvement Program projects. I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Stephen. Nathan is new to our office. He was the Northern Region Traffic and Safety Engineer, but he is now our Road Safety Engineer. And his primary responsibility actually is the Highway Safety Improvement Program.
Thanks, Pam.
Oh, yeah, you need that.
Yeah, and so just a little bit of background. I came to DOT in 2012, then came to Traffic Safety as HSIP coordinator in 2017, working under Pam when she was Regional Traffic and Safety Engineer then. And then for the last 3 years as Regional Traffic and Safety Engineer in Fairbanks. So I've been involved and done the screening process. Just a little bit of background. So I guess starting off with our selection process, kind of general overview for those of you who don't know, but it all starts out in early springtime. Your regional staff here, Anna and Dalton, they'll start screening through the crash data for Central Region. Once that gets screened down, they'll get a list and identify the eligible locations under our HSIP program, which again is a data-driven process. Locations are selected based on qualifiers such as you need 1 fatality or 2 fatals within a 2-mile segment, and then
2 meter.
I'm sorry, thank you. And so once those segments are identified, kind of go through and write some comments inside there on is this a location that we've known about? Is this a new location? Sometimes is it, or identifying it as is it slated for construction? Is it in planning? Has it been in design for years, or is it a past or previous HSIP project that is still going through the 3 years of post-construction data collection? So once that's established, we're here right now. We want to hold the workshops with you, the MPOs, and discuss these screening lists and see what your appetites are for looking at some of these segments, and if they align with kind of your ideas of where you want to pursue projects. And then once we have those discussions, your regional staff, again, Anna and Dalton, are going to start working on those locations and identifying countermeasures to address those locations and crash types. And then once that's done, they'll nominate projects, send them to the Highway Safety Office, where again, then we review them for eligibility and ranking. So ranking based on crash cost per mile and eligibility. Sorry, cost benefit. Yeah, and meeting the cost benefits. And then from there, create a funding plan and send for approval and signature. Okay, and some things to point out, we understand that there's many competing needs that vie for different project funding types through other programs. HSIP funds, are solely focused on reducing, preventing serious and fatal injuries throughout the state. And the project nomination selection process for this program is different than traditional DOT project selection and leads to controversy. So just to visualize kind of what each region is going through during this screening process. So here's just a snapshot of all the crashes in Central Region for 2020 through 2024. And again, these are verified crashes that have been reported. So this is what the screening team will look like. Next step, since we're doing this for the regional MPOs for AMATS. So if we, again, scale this down, filter it to all crashes within the AMATS boundary, this is what it looks like. And you can start visualizing or checking, yeah, is this kind of what we see or what we hear about, or these the locations that we're going to be focusing on or we get comments on. But then if we run that through the HSIP screening process, which again is 2 serious or 1 fatal, this is what it pairs down to. So this for the years 2020 through 2024, these are all the crashes within the AMATS boundary after it's gone through the screening process. And just to go in one further slide here, again, this is where all the serious and fatal crashes are. And I put this next slide in here. I feel like I need to address this because we get a lot of questions on, well, if you went back a couple slides, there's you might see a real heavy density of dots in another area, but I didn't see it show up in the site where you said your screening process showed. And well, that's true, but everything is weighted versus on your serious and fatal injuries. So if you normalize crash types, it takes 100 property damage fender benders to equal a fatal injury, or 5 minor injuries to equal a fatal. So while those crash types still do play a factor in selecting cost benefits, it's really focused down to your serious injury and fatal injuries. Okay, so one of the screening tools, I'm sure you're all familiar with this one, your high crash road network. So here, just pulled off of one of your publications there for the corridors and the hot spots. And then once we use another tool here, this was from our traffic data team, which is showing trends. So I should go back. All right, sorry. Our screening process is showing, the last 5 years, 2020 through 2024. So that's a snapshot in time. Here, what's another thing we can look at? Well, we're looking at trends. So the graph is showing vehicle miles traveled from 2014 to 2019, gradually increasing. Then we had the COVID, so that dropped. And then from 2021 through 2025, we see it gradually increasing back to almost levels where we started pre-COVID. And then the map, the yellow bands are showing traffic that was lower than
Post-COVID.
Is still lower than.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, post-COVID that was lower, but then the blue is higher. So another tool that your regional coordinators, HSIP coordinators are going to be looking at, layering or past data with these trending data sets, and then also INRIX. And I've heard that you're familiar with INRIX. It's one of our more recent tools that we are utilizing to get more recent snapshots or real-time data. And so this is risk scores that were pulled from fourth quarter in 2025. It's a sum of braking and speeding. Yes. And so what this is showing is the wider the band is equivalent to a higher ADT, and the hot pink is a higher risk score, and the lower risk areas is light blue. And what's interesting on the previous two MPO workshops we did was all the low risk score areas were identified as roundabouts. So again, this is taking data from connected vehicles and mobile telematics. Mobile telematics is your phone, is an accelerometer. If you've tied it into a Bluetooth system with a insurance app, it's tracking you that way. And this is not representative of all vehicles. It's just, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, GM.
It's GM for sure. It just merged with TomTom, so there will be updating and we'll be getting more data from the TomTom platform. Connected vehicle companies are not quick to release who all they get their data from. So that's what we know.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So again, using all these data sets and data layers, we begin to aggregate all these sources and start truthing out and say, well, we see something in our screening process that shows there's an issue on Main Street, but if we go back 3 quarters, it didn't show anything there. Kind of figure out what's going on there. I know from experience, I'm tying it back to my time in Northern Regions. We had University Avenue, which is a major north-south corridor in Fairbanks, and there was no crashes reported for 2 years on it. And if you didn't know any better, it's because we closed the entire road down for bridge construction for 2 years. So that's kind of the stuff that we're relying upon your Anna and Dalton, your regional resources to have that knowledge and to help dive through that in the data selection process. Okay, so
talk real quick. I think
sure.
This is another one Nathan alluded to before. Sorry, maybe Pam did. We want to become proactive instead of reactive, right? And so this is real-time data. And again, it's not a complete picture, but it might be part of how we get to a place where we're using this information to say, well, we might not have seen a fatality in this area, or we might not have seen serious injuries in this area. We can see that traffic volumes are increasing. We can see that the risk factor is going up. And so it's time to start paying attention before that fatality occurs. And this is one of the tools that we think will help us get to that place.
The other thing I'll share about INRIG, sorry.
Nope.
Here in Anchorage, actually, we have better data than we have in the rest of the state because there's just more drivers, more newer vehicles on the road to sample from. We don't have it in here because the numbers are fairly limited, but you can, and the folks who use INRIGs, you can go in there and you can filter down even to like pedestrian automatic braking, and you can see one on Northern Lights by the cars. Like somebody's car stopped them from hitting a pedestrian there. So while we're out here on the infrastructure side, isn't it great that the vehicle side is working on these problems as well? So you can dial into that data. It's pretty limited, which is why we didn't put it into the risk score, but that data is out there. If you put on hard braking, you'll get every intersection because everybody's coming up to the traffic light fast.
We had one when we first started looking at this of big red flag. Oh my word, we've got to dial in. What is going wrong in this neighborhood? And we finally figured out, that's odd. It's not next to the grocery store. It's not next to a school. It's in a parking lot and it's a brake repair shop. And so they do a lot of hard braking as they check brakes over and over. And so that's where, well, these are wonderful tools. There's something that it takes some local knowledge and nuance to work. We've got to work through them and just use them as part of our toolkit. All right. Thank you for letting us.
Great. No, appreciate it. Okay, so timeline. This is where we're at right now. We've again, the regions have done their preliminary screening. We're here now. As I mentioned, we met with the other 2 MPOs the last couple of weeks. So we're here to have these discussions. Again, the HSIP program and the nominations are the state's burden, and we're looking for MPO's input on what we can do and on segments that you have interest in, have identified. Some resources here for you to consider. The HSIP. So if you wanted website, if you wanted to go in, you could read our HSIP handbook or download the worksheets that we calculate for the screening process. Also, the Alaska Strategic Highway Safety Plan, that's a requirement of the HSIP. So all HSIP projects will align for more SHSP strategies. We'll note that in our nominations, which strategy they coincide with. Partners in Safety, this is another website where we recognize that we're not collecting all problematic issues. Like I said, if it's an HSIP or crash data, it's, either recorded by a law enforcement officer, traffic report, or a self-report. Partners in Safety is geared towards a safety concern reporter app. So if you see something, you can go in here, geolocate it, tag it, write us a comment on what you see. Is there guardrail down? Is guardrail missing? Are there signs missing? Is there bad retroreflectivity? Is a signal out of sync? Stuff like that. Also, NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, right now the behavioral grants window is open. That's another avenue that you could pursue for funding opportunities. And then the Alaska DOT Public Crash Portal. If you're not familiar with it right now, you can go there, log on, and sort crashes by type, injury. It's pretty limited, but we're in the process of transitioning over to AASHTO Safety, which is a product put out by New Metric. And so at some point, we hope to get that up and running. And once that does occur, we'd like to share it with our local government partners. So we'd be more than welcome to have access to that as well. So that was all I had for the presentation. Is there anything that...
We know some of you have access to INRIX. Is there anyone else who needs access? We can share that with our partners. Is that something that any of you need information on? That no thanks, we're not interested, or we've got it.
There's a lot of people in this room who already have it. I think it's really good.
Everybody good? Okay. All right, and then how about Pam, would you like to talk a little bit about kind of some of those controversial aspects to HSIP and maybe what the plans are going forward on how we would like to avoid those, how we'd like to transition our choices to quick wins and being able to react to what we see today instead of making a today reaction 6 years down the road when we finally get things up and running?
Yeah, so obviously we have some controversial HSIP projects in this area. Like we all know that. What I really want to see for the focus for this year's nominations is quick wins. What we found, and Aaron, I hope will nod his head as I say this, is pairing up an HSIP project with an HSIP project can be the death of both projects as far as delivery. So while it's a really great idea in concept, it has slowed some things down. We all are aware in this area of the pedestrian fatality issue, and the strong and much words are hard, but the strong desire and to address this issue. It's not something we want to see a project that's 6-7 years down the road. So trying to figure out what we can do that limits our need to buy right of way, limits our need to move utilities. These things take time, particularly in urban environments. Utilities can be its own issue altogether. So as we progress this year, it would be great to have a series of projects that aren't such, down the road things, and we can find some stuff that's easier to do. For example, Brad and Zach and Anna and I talked last week, maybe a week before at this point. And we're gonna put together a project to deal with, to look at pedestrian conflicts at our signalized intersections with what we can do with signal timings or not signal timing, sure, but more of the audible pedestrian signals and maybe some leading pedestrian intervals. And then identifying those that might need a little bit more work, but at least we could package it into 2 deliveries of this is the quick stuff that we could do right now. And these are the things that might take a little more effort with when we have combined through and turn lanes to see what sort of conflicts we could have removed. So that's a nomination that city and DOT are working on together. We met with People Mover. I think that one was last week for sure. About looking at some of their it's routes 10, 20, and 25. Does that sound right, Anna?
I think it's maybe 35. But yeah, the crosstown.
3
Yeah.
highest ridership routes and the stops on those routes to see to interview bus drivers as one idea. Like, what are they seeing as people get on and off the bus? You know, what kind of behaviors? What, you know, are there things we can do at some of these bus stops to improve safety? Because every bus stop is pedestrian interaction, and they're not located at crosswalks for the most part. So what can we do to improve that? Anna's gonna work on that, not as an HSIP project, but under the umbrella program to then lead projects. So, you know, we want to think a little bit, it's not even really outside the box, but a little differently. Like, what can we do to have this complement of things that we can show action, that we are delivering things that make Anchorage safer, don't require 6, 7, 8 years of utility work and figuring all this out. So that is my challenge to this group of what can we do faster. So Aaron, you said you wanted to go over the stuff you have.
Yeah, I think right now it's a good opportunity for questions from the committee members on what you guys presented before we move forward, because I don't want them to miss out. So are there any questions from the committee members? Yes.
Pretty basic. You mentioned Nathan, 45 million to the state plus penalty funding. What's the breakdown of that comes to the Anchorage MP?
So about 30% of our funding historically and this year is here, which is about 30% of the crashes of this qualifying segments. It's 30, 30, 30. It's like 30% of the population, 30, might be 35, but it breaks down actually pretty well with the population that crashes. We didn't know that. And then we looked at that just because we were curious too. And I was like, oh, look at this. I mean, it just sort of worked out that way.
So that's 15 to 20 million if you count in some of the penalty funding.
Yeah, some years are higher, some years are a little lower, but
So another question, are restriping, just solely restriping projects eligible for HSIP funding?
maybe. And I say that only because there's a new retroreflectivity requirement for long line stripes. And we can use MUTCD compliance as a justification for an HSIP project. And I know durable markings have their ups and downs. You know, that would be one reason to say you're improving the markings. And so we can chat, you, me, and Anna, we can chat about what.
Maybe to expand on that question, restriping as is there an opportunity to do lane drops with restriping as part of this? And does that fall into the?
You're quickly crossing into the high controversy, long-term.
So
But I do think that
That's
Pam,
why I'm here.
there's some nuance in what Pam's saying, right? And that's that concept of improvement to meet the MUTCD versus maintenance and operations of what we have today and just a constant repeat of that. Though one of those is eligible and one is not. Correct, Pam?
Remind me, please, what does MUTCD stand for?
sorry, I'm an
Put
acronym.
a dollar in the jar.
Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So
Annual.
on uniform traffic control devices. We just adopted the 11th edition through the adoption of our Alaska Traffic Manual, and there are changes. You know, the last one was 2009, so there's just changes that come into play over time. You'll see, I don't know that it'll affect any of the MPOs much, but we have issues with, we have to post bridges that are overweight or weight restricted. There's some new requirements at that, so we'll have a statewide project addressing the bridges that have to be addressed, because there's a compliance state for those.
Not HSIP.
Yes, there's just like, yes.
So how does that interact with HSIP projects now?
So it's a tool we can use to do some things that are, maybe not often done. And it's just because there's a new requirement on how retroreflective our stripes are and how we maintain that over time. So while a normal year's striping program wouldn't be in that, if we were saying, okay, we're going to go from paint to a durable marking because we expect it to have better retroreflectivity over time, then that's a potential way to use it, I guess, more creatively. It's certainly within the bounds of what's required, but it's a little more creative than what some of our other stuff has. But I want to address your lane drop question because there was federal, Sean Duffy issued a, what's it called, Shannon? But it's
What just came out from,
It's essentially a new memo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A memo came out from Sean Duffy about freedom to drive. So you can Google freedom to drive.
We'll be sending an email out to the committee members later. I got that.
Okay.
Yeah. And we don't know exactly what it means yet. It does certainly give precedence to driving over other modes in its tone. Yeah, he's nodding. He read it the same way.
Very capacity focused,
Yes.
really encouraging, not reducing capacity and accelerating projects that add capacity to help address congestion. It is typically, it doesn't say vehicle in there, but that would be the intent, is vehicle capacity.
and again, we haven't had much
We
time
haven't
to look
played
at this. We don't know, but.
Yep.
But back to your, where can we go that is a way to respond very short term to the data and the environment we see today without maybe running up against some of these other ones is what we're hoping that we can come up with some creative ideas together that can do that. And things like using the MUTCD compliance requirement to then handle striping is one of those creative ways.
I just want to put a slightly finer point on that. So am I understanding correctly that based on this memo coupled with the guidance from Alaska DOT, it's highly unlikely that anything that reallocates a lane is going to be approvable or workable in the near future?
I don't think we can say that because we don't really understand, we've received this as an email. We still have the policies as DOT in place today that we had yesterday. So we have to do some research on our side, but I wouldn't say that there's any likely assumed, and I wouldn't worry about any of that until we all know what it actually says, what it means and what we're directed to do. And if it changes any of our existing requirements, regulations or policies.
That said, I didn't want to be disingenuous and not mention that had just come out.
Okay, any other questions? There was a question that was put in the chat from a committee member. Is this presentation available for reference? Can I send it out to the committee members after the meeting so they have it? Okay, great. Okay, unless there are any other questions from committee members.
Yeah, so I would like to highlight the question from Brandon Telford. In a way, kind of acting for Melinda.
No, he is not.
I point out that.
Yes, if you would like to, but Melinda did not indicate anybody was acting for her while she was out, so we can't assume that. Sorry.
Right, so I'd like to elevate that for a quick question as well.
Which one would you like? There's two. One about the HSIP program, better alignment with safe systems approach, or the May 1st deadline extension.
Safe system approach.
Okay, there is a comment in the chat. Can the HSIP program be updated for better alignment with the safe systems approach? Current project selection considers crash reduction versus costs. Safe system approach moves beyond reducing crashes to reducing speeds and forces involved in crashes to levels that are tolerable to the human body. The commenter's understanding is the HSIP program is set up by DOT with FHWA oversight. could DOT propose a process that's better aligned with the safe systems approach?
Okay, so our current handbook is in place through the end of IIJA. So when which is the, yes, I know, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Federal Highway Funding Bill. So that is expiring this year, right?
Yes.
So
26th of last year.
whether we're under an extension or there's a new bill that comes out, we don't know. That is when we will open the handbook again and have those discussions with federal highways. It's not necessarily off the table, but there is a requirement to, even from the federal level, to maximize life saved per dollar spent. So cost is always going to be a factor in that. But we haven't, we can reopen how we score beyond just cost. Cost is but one factor when we rank projects for funding.
And would it be worth bringing up unranked projects too? Because I believe it's another option through HSIP where it doesn't rely on the cost benefit factor.
Yeah, so we do have what we call non-ranked projects. Some of those are just compliance issues. Some of those are, we're trying something new because we feel confident that this is a safety improvement, but there's not a published countermeasure for that. What would get you kicked out of the program, I suppose, or kicked out of eligibility is if you wanted to say you wanted to use a countermeasure. It said you'd have a 29% reduction and then you can't meet our benefit cost thresholds. So if a project is over $5 million, you have to have at least a 0.5 to 1 benefit cost. If it's less than that, it's a 0.2 to 1, which is really flexible compared to some other states. But when we rank projects for funding, again, the ranked projects typically fall above the non-ranked projects. Ranked just means we have a benefit cost calculated for it. There does come a point where it's like, oh, okay, that last project, and then the next ranked project is too expensive, so we'll fill in with maybe some non-ranked projects that are lower in cost. But things like road safety audits are always going to be unranked. There's not a cost benefit published for that. They are super important in identifying needs and figuring out the right solutions, which reminds me, the other thing I wanted to mention and didn't have a good spot for was we try to be careful about nominating HSIP projects in advance of a planning study completing. Now, if it's well along its way and like we all sort of know what the outcome is, that's different. But if we're nominating an HSIP project at the same time, planning study is initiating on a project, and I'm not saying an example here, but we do have an example in Fairbanks where we agreed with the MPO, like, let's pause on doing anything here because that study is kicking off. Let that sort of drive where it needs to go. So there are, you want to be cautious about choosing a solution that maybe doesn't align with what the real solution is. On the flip side to that, HSIP is an excellent Band-Aid to get to a longer, bigger project.
Other questions? Yes.
So pardon my ignorance. So I would love to understand what the suite of options actually looks like when we're talking about things that are, the short-term wins, quickly deliverable, don't involve this long runway, 5, 6, 7 years to implement. What does that actually mean in the real world? Like, what are the things that could be possible? I am not an engineer. I don't know what that even looks like and what the edges of the creative envelope are. And so I think it would help me to hear what that means to someone who knows this system and far more comprehensively than I do.
So that's a great question, especially since we're kind of struggling that within ourselves for a little, for a certain amount. I mentioned the signal work. That's something to be done. Anna has been talking about making the crosswalks all high visibility crosswalks, which means you have both the long lines and they're called transverse and longitudinal, but you have you think of it as a ladder, you have the sidebars and all the rungs. So, you know, making crosswalks high visibility, some of the projects to install pedestrian conspicuity things like the rectangular rapid flash beacons, or you know, that just don't need quite the right of way. You know, yes, there's still some issues with those, getting those in, but that's still a much quicker thing. Speed feedback signs. Go ahead, Anna.
So, yeah, if I may, Dalton and I have been looking at some of these low-cost treatments for consideration as it relates to overlaying some of the data sets that Christine and Pam showed. So speeds, heartbreaking, also angle crashes. So we are looking at all-way stop control, changing from where you have a two-way stop control on the side street to an all-way stop control. Those tend to be locations that maybe in the future would be a roundabout, but it could be a really low-cost, quick treatment. There's one on Huffman Road, for instance, that we're looking at. There's a you know, some others in the Matsu. There's also some locations potentially in South Anchorage. So those are some things. Like Pam mentioned, we have over 300 signalized intersections, and to just highlight those existing crosswalks and making yield compliance better there. We have an existing example at Elmore and Tudor. So when you're leaving the office here, you can see that there. And anecdotally, I know Zach has told me that when he crosses there, he feels more comfortable, more confident that people are yielding to him, that they know he's in the right spot, and gets better compliance, especially at right turns on red. That's another, you know, potential low cost mitigation, is to evaluate where locations that maybe we need to change to no right on red, and have enhanced signalized kind of ITS solutions where you have a blank out, intelligent traffic systems, and essentially something to deal with the signalized intersection, but basically having, if somebody were to push a button, you know, a pedestrian's there, a sign would come up, no right on red, when the pedestrian or bicyclist is there and they've pushed the button. I've seen it in action in California, and it's pretty effective. Other things could be adding green paint to existing bike lanes. That's a new feature that's part of the MUTCD. So just enhancing those existing facilities. And then more things like with transit that we talked about, after we get this road safety audit, that might lead to some specific projects there, crossing treatments, maybe more lighting, enhancing existing lighting locations. So those are kind of our short list of things that might be less controversial, quicker to deliver.
The other piece here is that, you know, that doesn't mean that's the whole list, right? And if somebody is traveling and sees something that they think would work in Alaska, if we see something new from the vendor, all of those are on the table at this point, just as a way to, you know, we don't want to use everything we've already used in the past. That doesn't seem to be getting us where we want to go. So, all right, we're open to new things, even if we don't know what they are yet. Okay.
So how much flexibility within the HSIP funding bucket is there to address like seasonal safety challenges?
We do our best to make it as flexible as we can. Like I am not shy about calling, if it's on the edge, I will call Federal Highways and go, here's why I think this will work, to get their buy-in. We do our best to be as creative and flexible within this program as we can and still be within the rules. As long as what we're proposing supports the strategic highway safety plan, we're good to go. Here's the trick. We put in the strategic highway safety plan that anything eligible for highway safety improvement program funding is included. So we have a catch-all in the strategic highway safety plan. We certainly have our focus areas based on the safe system approach in the strategic highway safety plan, but we have a catch-all in there to make sure we weren't excluding ourselves from doing something. Seasonal stuff gets hard, right? Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, it's all across the state. It's different in each major city, but it's all there. we have been asked about seasonal bike lanes in places, and that's another one that gets really dicey with federal highways. Once it's a lane, it's always a lane. So you can't just dump snow in it all winter and walk away. So if you have ideas, get them to Anna and Dalton to think about. Like, I'm willing to pursue many things. It's just making sure that federal highway says, yes, this is eligible. That's where we sort of go with that.
A couple questions kind of following up on that and season stuff. So I think I know the answer, but is there any opportunity to move HSIP funds towards maintenance, towards snow removal activities?
So I'm going to answer that with a no, and that's because I have asked the same question about frost heaves. We have places we know frost heaves are contributing to crashes, and it's considered a maintenance activity.
What about equipment? I know that DOT in particular is challenged by the equipment that they use for sidewalks in Anchorage. The municipality has the benefit of having had a AMATS grant to buy all trackless machines. I think DOT is more challenged. Can we buy equipment with that?
I don't believe so. The equipment we have been able to buy has been zone related.
One more question.
I think also it's important that we kind of get back to that piece where was mentioned at the beginning is there's all sorts of funding needs. There's various methods that DOT funds equipment, maintenance, operations, all these pieces. And so on one hand, in no way are we saying that isn't a need or it shouldn't be considered, but this specific program and this specific funding has a defined data-driven, these regulations, these requirements. And we want to use that, right? Because the flexibility allows us to address safety. Not that that doesn't affect safety, but this is one targeted approach to funding.
One last question. You've mentioned that because we don't have some of the laws in place, that some of the AMATS funding, the HSIP funding rather, goes to the penalty funding. Is there an opportunity to focus more of that towards APD and their ability to do enforcement in some of these high crash corridors?
So a great question. So we fund about $2 million of APD every year through the Highway Safety Office behavioral grants. Within the HSIP side, there is a specific call out for what's called a specified safety project. It's a special rule, which allows us to do a handful of things. And one of those is facilitates the enforcement of traffic laws. So actually tomorrow I am talking to APD.
Oh, great.
So we can see if there's anything we can do on that side on top of the grants they already apply for and get. Actually it might be 4 million. I think it's 2 million in the impaired driving and about 2 million in other stuff. So they have a pedestrian safety program. They have they do high visibility enforcement for speeding. They do remember them all, but they do. We've got them new vehicles for their.
And they may not have the capacity.
That actually does come up is that sometimes we have offered them more money than they can staff to use. But that's a great idea. And yes, there's a mechanism for it. It's another part of the Highway Safety Office.
Just a comment. One reason I brought this up is that former Assembly Member Meg Zalatil in particular was interested in making Tudor Road, a section of Tudor Road, I forget the term.
Urban safety.
Yeah, an urban safety corridor. And one of the challenges there was, you can put all the signs up you want, you have to have enforcement. So that's not a question, just a commentary on the discussions we've had in the past.
Current Assemblymember Baldwin Day is also interested in that project. A follow-on, oh, sorry.
I think she has something to add to that.
I was just going to add also one thing that is HSIP eligible is safety cameras. So red light running cameras, speed enforcement cameras. So those are eligible and, I think only maybe allowed currently outside of Anchorage. There's no prohibition in state code to it. So that is something that's also an eligible. So if you're talking about, trying to have enforcement more strategically in locations, we've seen it be successful in other locations when you have it very specifically clear to the public why you're doing it, what it's gonna be intended for, and that it maybe is not a long-term solution, that it's an interim solution until you can reconstruct or I address some other thing that's going on in the corridor. So school zones have been successful, work zones have been successful. And then I think having maybe a follow-on capital project would also be an opportunity to be successful in a targeted manner.
You just answered my question, so
Okay.
thank you. No, I do want to voice what I think is a challenge for the public to understand, and this is a comment, and certainly not intended to come across as accusatory or anything like that. I just think it's really difficult when the public hears about highway safety improvement funding. It's difficult to communicate why, when so many of our safety challenges are seasonal and do stem from challenges with maintenance, particularly on sidewalks. And everyone in Anchorage watches people walk in the road because sidewalks are impassable. It's really hard to explain why something that has a name like Highway Safety Improvement Program cannot be leveraged to fill what is very clearly a systemic gap because of what feels like some pretty arbitrary guardrails, some arbitrary standards for what constitutes a safety improvement. And for a member of the public who's listening or who's paying attention to these conversations, it's very difficult for me to explain that even though purchasing, for example, some trackless equipment for the central region to use in Anchorage on our sidewalks is an extremely low cost on the whole, like extremely low cost, high yield intervention. It would absolutely make a dramatic difference in the safety of our roadways in the wintertime, but that is not an eligible expenditure. So I guess one of the questions that's embedded in my comment is, what recourse do we have as a city or as a state that has this very specific climate challenge that isn't reflected really like many other places in the lower 48? What advocacy opportunities are there for a policymaker or for a group of policymakers to band together and actually communicate directly with federal highways about this particular issue and to ask for like some kind of concession or change or something that appreciates that our context is extremely different than Phoenix or LA or Seattle or any of these other places, and to ask for something that allows us to do what we all know, like everybody in this room knows, like this is something that needs to be addressed and it's needed to be addressed for a long time. What's the lever that we have to engage and to move the needle on this in some way that actually benefits our community?
So that is Elisa Murkowski, Dan Sullivan, Nick Biggett should ask. Our restrictions are codified in 23 CFR 148. Like there's a list of 28 things I think we can spend our money on. And so that's where we try to get as flexible as we can, but the HSIP law basically would have to be opened up to include that.
23 CFR 148.
23 CFR 148.
Great.
Yeah. It goes more specific than that. I just don't remember it beyond that, but
I don't mind if you run a federal statute.
23
but I'll go
CFR
put that.
148 HSIP, it'll get you there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is that something that's normally done as, is that something that's normally done as part of like an authorization bill, or is it like a separate component?
I think Shannon can
Yeah.
also help us here.
Yeah, there have been some tweaks to the federal law as a result of the authorization, exactly what you're saying. And most recently, if you looked at the marine highway funding, it allows, well, the law was written in such a way that it benefited states that have long marine routes that we could use federal funding for operations. So there has been a precedent. There are some tweaks that are unique to Alaska that have been allowed in the reauthorization bills.
And as I mentioned, that specified safety rule that was added at the last highway bill. So I mean, the time is right, I suppose, if you wanted to do that.
There are some things I'm willing to go to the mat for, and this is one of them. So thank you. That's helpful.
I just wanted to add one more thing if I could, just to mention that Central Region has actually taken a lot of efforts to diversify their sidewalk equipment this last year. So by the end of the season, we actually had 8 pieces of equipment when traditionally we'd had 3 to 4. And then they also, because sidewalk plows are, kind of notorious for, pulling in a dog leash and breaking. So they've also started to diversify the type of equipment so that they can have more flexibility into some of these larger storms or back-to-back storms. Just want to let.
They've transitioned some of their equipment as well to being multi-season, what used to be only winter or only summer. And then, of course, half as much equipment. When it goes down, it's more of a problem. And so they've been working hard to make sure that what they do have, we're using year round, which also goes to benefits and funding.
Love it. Okay, sorry to, let's go ahead and move to our next set because we only have about 30 minutes left. We'll have more time for questions after. I wanted to turn it over to Emily real quick. Just a second, Emily. So we as staff put together some stuff for you, really, really quick review. I asked Emily to put it together yesterday. So this is a very brief look. I apologize, but we were stressed and a lot of stuff going on. I did want to point out a couple of things for you guys though. 2024 is when we had our first kind of nomination process as part of it. And I wanted to point out, we had 2 projects that were nominated from AMATS. There was the DeBar nomination and there was the Mountain View Drive nomination. Mountain View Drive is currently an HSIP project that is underway, and DeBar, I believe, is having a road safety audit done. And then in 2025, we had 2 nominations that we submitted, well, 3 really, Dale, McInnes, and Wright. So Dale and Wright were packaged together as part of the Tudor one that's going to be looked at as part of the Tudor pavement project. And then we have the McInnes one, which did not go forward. The reason I pointed out is it's been a really good effort so far for these HSIP nominations for AMATS. And I want to extend a thank you to Central Region staff and headquarters staff for their work on this, because it really shows there's need and there's a willingness to cooperate, coordinate together. And so I regardless of what comments or questions we get, I want everybody to understand we're in this together. We're trying to make it happen. And I really appreciate everybody's effort. I think there are some challenges we have and we're working towards that. So that said, I want to turn it over to Emily because she did some work for you all. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share something that is also printed out if committee members didn't get that. So there's a page back there with table and map. And I did also print out our high crash network just for reference. We already saw that on one of the DOT slides. What we wanted to bring today was just some ideas to start with in terms of nominate or what locations would we nominate projects. This table that we're showing is built from crash data. It does not follow specifically the HSIP screening process that we just heard a little bit about, but all these locations would qualify in terms of the 1 fatality or 2 serious injuries. And the goal for today was to really narrow it down. So if you've seen our high crash network map, it includes quite a lot, and it's really hard to focus in on where priorities might be. So for today, we were looking at, as I think it might have been Pam mentioned, there's some motivation for quick wins. So we were looking at the hot spots rather than the corridors. So instead of saying, let's do all of 36th Avenue, what are some really specific locations where we could look at what might be helpful there. So the table is showing the top 8 locations just because they were all pretty bad. And then there was kind of a break where the ones after that they had lower crash rates. And then the map is showing out of those 8 locations, some of those already have projects in process. And so the ones with projects existing or coming up are not shown on the map. So the map winnows down the table list even a little bit. I think today we're hoping for some discussion on whether you'd like to pursue any of these, if you'd like us to flesh out kind of what we have for these locations. If you all have other locations in mind that you think we should be looking at, we can absolutely do that as well. And go back to the data and break stuff for the May meeting. But yeah, so these are just a starting point. So the first one, looking at the crash rate, first fatal and serious crashes per mile. The top one that comes out is 3rd Avenue, and it's just this little section between Ingra and Latouche. The second one is C Street between 32nd and 36th. Scroll down to that on the map. That's a section in Midtown. The third one is Tudor and C Street, and I did make a note there that I believe had a recent HSIP project, and so it's possible, I don't remember specifically if there's firm cutoff for it's not eligible again yet. There's also the fact that data would have been from before that project happened, and so it may not be clear yet if that area is still a problem or if that's just kind of a holdover from before that project. Bragg is on there. Of course, we have the Safe Streets for All grant in progress on Bragg. So that may not be one that we want to consider this year, but I did include it just for context. Muldoon from 6th to DeBar. So this is one that might be worth some discussion because we do have a Muldoon corridor study coming up. It's not scheduled to start for a couple more years. And then I don't know how long that corridor study is. And, you know, it might identify things that could then be programmed for funding, which then might take 5 to 10 years to actually be built. So I'm not sure if that could be an opportunity to say, yes, things are coming up, but if we could identify kind of a Band-Aid in the meantime, maybe that's still worth considering. And then we get down to the Gamble and Ingra area, which are not on the map because they do have projects in progress through the Seward to Glen PEL. So those are, you know, maybe another opportunity to talk about how long is that going to take and is there a quick Band-Aid that we could think about for the near term if that's of interest. And then 5th Avenue from Medford to Sitka is on there, and I believe that's where there is a pedestrian project in progress for the Carluck area in that area as well. So these are here to maybe start a conversation on what you all might like to pursue for nominations, with an eye toward your May meeting where you will be making a decision on what you'd like to pursue for nomination. You open it up to any questions first on table or map or anything related.
I did have a question, and I think Brandon actually is speaking to it in the chat. I thought there was a project on 3rd in that area. And maybe I can ask him to clarify what PM&E is up to in that area.
Yeah, so we submitted a CDS request, which I believe stands for Congressional Discretionary Spending to the Kowski office for 2 corridors, section of 3rd, the other one is a section of 15th. That's actually to the west of Gamble Street. And that's a roughly $5 million request. They asked if out of those 2 projects, only one of them could proceed, which would be kind of the most economical one to proceed with, and we told them it would be the 3rd Avenue one. But we haven't heard back on any decision on that request.
That's a project in design for a while in that area as well, right?
I don't know that ever made it to design, but
Well, there's 2 different things. There is an AMATS project for 3rd Avenue, but I think that may be west of this section. Is
It
it?
ends at Gamble. It's from like E to Gamble, basically.
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So this is a different location. Okay.
And then several years ago, the municipality had a project to look at the pedestrian vehicle interactions along the section from Post up the hill to Carluck, I think. And that one, it ended because there was not a reasonable solution available at the time for the amount of funding we had there. That was when the Beans Cafe and Brother Francis were operating in a different model than they are now. I know there's still concerns there.
What is contemplated in that section? On 3rd.
Us. So we have not gotten that far yet. It would be a matter of if you guys are generally interested in pursuing those locations, then we'll come back in May with a more in-depth look at what, you know, in the table, we have kind of what the most common crash types are, and that can give us a place to start, but, you know, we'd want to do more work on kind of what the problems are and what the interventions might be, because then that comes back to the question of, do we have to move utilities, and how expensive is it going to get, and how quick is it? And that could certainly affect what we end up nominating.
On that note, the funding, for HSIP this year, I've heard different amounts thrown around, and I'm just curious where we're at with the funding for this next cycle, if anyone knows.
So as in how much, or gosh, Be Safe, go to the Be Safe website. Sorry, we can bring it up.
t.alaska.gov/BC.
Oh, he's not on the Wi-Fi. Is anybody on Wi-Fi? It's really easy to find.
Okay, let's do DOT.
dot.alaska.gov/be safe.
Oh, okay.
Or just search for it. You'll find it.
Okay, Alaska DOT Be Safe. Is it the partners in safety?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's one that's like plans in action up on the top bar.
In action.
And one of those funding plans.
HSIP funding plan approval letter. Okay.
Well, funding plan is there, but you have to break down on it and get to the AMATS.
Second.
Or
Sure.
he's got it on.
Okay, great. Because this is for the 26
This is the
cycle.
current cycle, yeah.
And we have that in the
And
tip.
were you asking for the next, like, is that what your question
What's
was?
the projects that we're nominating?
Oh, or
Where we're going tomorrow?
Oh, we don't know. Like, I mean, like this year, there's there's $28 million projects that could be in AMATS. If they all deliver in time. So each year it's sort of we just kind of draw the line and start over with what needed to deliver and what didn't.
And I think it's important, and we've had, which has also been a, conversation that's happened in the past, is that drawing the line just means, it's a rolling project all the time. And so it doesn't mean, and we throw everything else away. It means, here's where that line falls this year, and then we move forward. And then we're always, as Pam is mentioning, working on what can deliver, what can't deliver, what slipped. Okay, then slide this in, move that around. Ran into a utility problem. Okay, we're gonna shuffle this project in while we wait for that to happen. So there's a lot of moving pieces to this program. Which is a long way to say, sorry, we can't tell you. I could have made that shorter.
I am definitely interested in the C Street 32nd to 36th Avenue suggestion, and would love to see if we have updated data on the Tudor and C Street intersection that could inform, whether the recent project maybe is or is not happening in that space. I'd be very interested in that. Another thing that maybe we have, and I'm just not aware of it. I would love to know where we actually have unmarked crosswalks along Tudor and Muldoon. I believe that we have.
So everywhere, and I don't mean that to be flip. Every intersection is a crosswalk. That's state. Every intersection is a crosswalk. So
Also just a sign that says no cross.
yeah.
So those are all legal places.
So in that case, I think that the Muldoon 6th to DeBar is pretty ripe for particularly pedestrian, whether that's like striping or something. I think we walked that stretch. That feels like a really important place to do some work. And you guys are going to get really tired of hearing me talk about Tudor, and I know we already have like McGinnis and Wright and Dale and like lots of things going on Tudor. But there's, I don't know if HSIP funds can be used for like public education, but the fact that the public only seems to think that crosswalks exist where there are stripes on the ground, I think is a safety concern all along the high crash network. So
We had a quick note on one of those slides that the NHTSA behavioral grant period is open right now. And not to segue us, but that is something that that various groups within this room can apply for and work on. That it also is a data-driven program, and so there's some requirements on how we show that that that's an educational need or a behavioral change that's needed in the public schools.
Yeah,
Regarding that, so Pam and I have been talking actually about the NHTSA thing because currently AMATS is funding a non-motorized safety campaign and has been for a number of years. It's done through the Center for Safe Alaskans, headed up by Traffic at the Muni. I met with Kim, who heads it up here at the Muni, and talked with her. We need to meet with Pam and talk through a couple of things because the Center for Safe Alaskans has a lot on their plate already. And so we're not sure they have the capacity to be able to add more to it, but we're looking at seeing if there's other options to take advantage of some of the NHTSA funding and see what we can do with it. So I have to schedule a meeting with Pam soon.
What is NHTSA?
National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They do all the things from like the crash test dummies and crash tests to this.
Click it or ticket.
Pick your ticket, you know. Yeah.
National Highway.
National Highway.
Behavioral.
And safe. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Seatbelt usage, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Well, I have a question on, we've talked about HSIP projects in the past, different ones. And some are funded, some I'm not sure about, some I think didn't make it in this conversation. Are those just assumed to be going forward, or do we need to specify, hey, the McKennis and Tudor project, like, where is that? That should be a priority too, sort of thing, like what's helpful for those conversations?
So Anna, you have to help me with McGinnis and Tudor.
So McGinnis and Tudor evaluated it for having a signal.
Signal warrants.
Signal warrants were not met. And that is something that's in the MUTCD. The other aspect was that we had staff go out and take light levels in the area, and although on all of Tudor and Muldoon, and the light levels, although they meet the minimum criteria, they were the lowest for all those corridors, all from the entire corridor of Tudor and the entire corridor of Muldoon. That section in McKinnis was the lowest level of light that still met the minimum, but it was the lowest level. And it's challenging because there's a utilidor on the south side that is limiting the ability to put in additional lighting on that side. So we really are restricted to the north side, which has, curb adjacent sidewalk for a good chunk of it. It also is just a wide corridor at 5 lanes. That light is gonna be less able to capture everything throughout it. So we looked at it from the 5 years of crash data for last year's cycle. We can look at it again and see if the crash warrants were met. We looked at, there's some additional crash warrants and the MUTCD didn't meet any of those either. So it's just one of those things that we'll continue to try, but we do have some other projects in the area. Galen has the Tudor interchange project, and I know he's looking at seeing what that we can do east of the interchange to maybe capture McKinnis there. So I'm not familiar with where he's at in terms of a timeline for that project.
I think they got to a point where they're decided on the interchange type there, so they're advancing that design, but I know I've had conversations with them on McGinnis too, and expanded the scope there to the east, and so we'll continue to have those conversations as that project develops. We've also got the pavement preservation project on Tudor. There's a corridor plan gone out to RFP, is my understanding, on a corridor plan for Tudor. So we're aware of Tudor. Want to have additional conversations.
We also have the speed public hearing coming up June 10th for the speed limits along Tudor and Muldoon corridors. And so that'll inform that speed study that we have drafted right now.
Continuing kind of in that same corridor there to Muldoon, talked a little bit about the corridor plan. I don't know where that is in planning priorities on when that one would go out to RFP, but I know that one is a high priority. We've got a pavement preservation on Muldoon as well, so I think the information provided here, appreciate all the work that went. Like to see what recommendations might be coming from that, and if that's something we could fit within a PM project, that would necessarily under HSIP, but you know, wherever we can get these improvements in, I'll continue to have those discussions.
And Muldoon is another corridor that's challenged with utilities on the west side of it. And so each intersection is lacking lighting because there's nowhere to put those poles, and you can't have the lights over the utility and within a certain proximity of the electrical lines over it. So it is a challenging corridor. I will say that staff, Dalton and I have looked at putting together a draft HSIP nomination for Muldoon. However, a lot of the lower cost treatments would require a lower speed limit. So trying to have maybe RRFBs, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, would need a lower, right now it's 40 miles an hour with high volumes. So to get good yield compliance, we're really needing it down below 35. If we want just some of those lower cost treatment interventions to get good compliance. Another thing would be to put in a full signal, but then you're talking a major investment and years. So there's some trade-offs there.
Is an RRFB one of the devices that like you push a button and it lights up like it's like a signal to drivers like, hey, someone is about to cross.
Do you have any?
Yeah, we have them at Dowling Roundabout. So we only have them in one location. We do have them in the other region. So if you were to drive through Dowling Roundabout, they are there for crossing Dowling, not but when you're going east-west, but when you're going north-south as a pedestrian crossing at a couple locations at that roundabout. We do have an active research project with UAA to evaluate how effective they are there for yield compliance. I will say that the design speed of that roundabout is 35 miles an hour. And so with the double lane roundabout, my personal experience out there with high vis vest, people were still not yielding even with the RRFB. So I think we have to pair these devices with the right geometry and the right operational speeds to make them effective for telling the signal to the driver, giving them time to react with a lower speed. And
I think your question was about whether it requires pedestrian participation to hit the button, correct?
Oh, yeah, I was just wanting to understand, like, how is this different than I know it's not technically called a hawk signal, it's something else that okay, whatever that thing is. I'm trying to just understand what the difference is between those two.
It's a warning sign, literally a rectangular flashing beacon. That's why it's a rectangular rapid flash beacon. And so it just it bounces back and forth in a rectangle instead of like a bouncing ball top and bottom or something. It's just.
They both require user pedestrian participation.
The hope is that the rapid flash pattern catches your eye better than.
Sure. Has there been any conversation about the devices that actually illuminate the crossing area?
Yes.
Yes.
Actually, I just made it. Ask Luke about the soffit lights because
the what are they called?
Soffit is one of the name, right? It's the one that like follows you across the crosswalk, so it illuminates your path.
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's exactly.
So yes, I have a list from Graham of some potential locations. Anna's made some comments on it, and I think where it sits right now is we need somebody in the region to sort of pick it up and make it happen.
I would also say we're interested also in finding some locations on other municipal roads where our understanding is
Most of them were on this.
they're relatively inexpensive.
What is the 37,000 per unit?
$7,000.
And that's for a version that's made cold weather, and cold weather in Alaska has a range, right? So we've seen it function in Kodiak. They have their own unique conditions compared to Anchorage, and again, different conditions in Fairbanks. But I believe our goal is to put in 2 or 3 in Central Region.
Let's have a conversation there. I'm the holdup. I don't want to be.
That's fine.
No, I
Like, not yet.
All right.
This particular vendor also is willing to train us on how to do it. While they came to Kodiak and participated, there is some continual, I don't want to make that sound like a lot of maintenance and operations, but you have to dial into the crosswalk in question. You have to consider what's outside of that boundary. You know, in Kodiak, there was a staircase that came up from the dock. There's some other things to do, and they're willing to train us, which we could, when they come up, could certainly share.
So I guess I'm curious about then the order of operations, because I really appreciate what Ms. Boson just said about the fact that pairing the device with the geometry and the appropriate speed is kind of like the magic trifecta of actually changing people's behavior. So what does that order of operations look like in a location where we would like to deploy some of these cool tools, but the geometry of the road and the speed don't allow us to do that? Like, how do we get a quick win when two of the three elements are not immediately, or maybe they are immediately controllable, but there's a lot of like other layers of implementing those changes to make the quick thing possible? How do we do that?
Figure that out, let me know. That is the challenge with so many of our projects.
The second we start moving curve, the second, I mean, we're impacting utilities, we're usually acquiring right away, and all those are long lead items. So the infrastructure changes that go along with some geometry changes, unless we have excess geometry in those locations and utilities are on the outskirts of the right of way, we're in long lead items there. So, and unfortunately, in an urban setting like Anchorage, we don't have a lot of right of way. We don't have utility poles or sidewalks, right? Utilities are, it's a
Do we have
challenging environment.
Do we have the option of like temporarily, say, narrowing lanes to bring speeds down, or like doing other things that temporarily change the roadway configuration and call it a pilot project? Right? Like, is there a way to do that sort of socializes the community into, driving slower on a Muldoon, that then also allows us to implement some of, like text notes, soffit lights, or our RFBs or hawk signals? I mean, is there a way to do temporary adjustment that it doesn't require us to go digging around in curves and things?
We pursued those, right? I mean, Elmore right here is a good example where we narrowed lanes with paint. I think the signal head work, the retroreflectivity, a lot of that work that we can do on existing signals is stuff that can move quickly. So yeah, that's absolutely things that we want to be pursuing here.
I think you're on the right path there. Instead of, square peg round hole operation, right? Where we know ultimately if we had all of our choices, all the right of way, all the utilities in the right spot, we would do this. Okay, well, we don't. So I think that's where, AMATS in the community identifies their locations. You reach out to your regional contacts. Anna and, her team are here to help say, okay, given this set of parameters that we're in this location, here's a countermeasure that we believe will work, or here's an idea that we think is worth pursuing. And then through her team, those nominations come up. And I think, we're always open to great ideas, but we may not achieve everything we possibly wanted. So I think what we do is we start looking for, okay, given our constraints, what's left?
So I will say, we have an example of some sort of a quick build scenario that's happening on DeBar Road right now at Bragaw, where we have flex posts that have delineated out a turn pocket for 3 going on 4 winters now. And it just had flex posts. So, yeah, I'm just saying, it may not be the ideal situation, but that is an interim solution until we can fix the degrading sinkhole below it or whatever that's happening structurally. And it's operated okay. It's a low cost intervention that is doing its job right now. So if we keep that kind of mindset, but put it towards safety instead of the infrastructure structure, maybe there's opportunities to do temporary bulb outs at intersections maybe there's some ideas of taking some turn pockets and narrowing the intersection a little bit and tightening those radii so that people slow when they take a right. And so those could be interim solutions, but we would have to address the maintenance, and understand that those areas are not gonna be, look that great. Maybe during the summertime, they might collect some, stuff in there, and it might cause a little bit of pending for maintenance to take them out temporarily to do their sweeping and put them back. And then they might also be a great opportunity to have snow stored in it for the winter, and then you have a place for that sidewalk snow to go. So I'm open to considering those locations and trying those, especially in places where we have a corridor study that maybe we need a little bit more information, but we don't want to wait 10 years.
This came up on a nomination 2 years ago, maybe. Our problem, if you want to see it as a problem, is if we use HSIP money to do the temporary fix and the permanent fix is basically the same thing, we can't use HSIP money twice to solve the same problem. So if we use HSIP as the quick build piece, a capital project a non-HSIP capital project has to come behind to take the temporary solution out, because we've already addressed the safety problem. So just eyes wide open going into that's the downside of it, but it's also the positive of getting something in quick.
Okay, real quick, we are out of time. I know there's been a lot of questions. I see there's one more question, but I have to ask something really quickly before you guys go. Our schedule is to get this before the committees in May for approval of the nominations to submit to you. Looking at the schedule that you guys posted online, it looks like we may be out of sync there. So are we gonna miss our opportunity because we were late in getting this work session?
Get it pre-packed. May 1 is really when we're just asking the regions to get certain steps. Like,
Okay.
If you like, that was really to sort of make sure we're progressing. Full nominations are really due later. This was like, all right, get us your concepts. We're not going to say we can't consider the 3 or 4 projects that AMATS wants us to consider because they just make one. So don't worry about that.
I do want to discuss though really quickly, because words matter. Nominations come from who?
From the regions. Yeah. From
What I'm hearing you saying is that AMATS is going to send us a nomination.
Yeah, we call them nominations,
Okay.
even if you guys call them, like, even if they're not technically nominations, because it's easier for us to keep track of. We nominate.
No,
these
that's fine.
projects,
Just,
you guys.
again,
Yeah,
words
yeah.
have the
Words-
definition on our side would be different.
Yep.
But by all means, Anna is your contact, and then you send those ideas, needs, concerns to Anna. She works on finding a countermeasure that works, and then she subsequently writes that nomination or works with the team to write that nomination, and up it goes through the chain to work through all the cross the T's, dot the I's, make sure all the eligibility is there.
We will not be submitting them directly to you guys. We do work through Anna.
You're always welcome to share. I just wanted to, I didn't want anybody to come back and say, oh, it's an official nomination, here we go. It's
Yes.
they'll go.
Thank you for that.
And we're committed to providing Anna and Dalton support. Like if they get a bunch of stuff done, we have a team now of folks who can. So,
And we can help with the data that backs.
yeah.
One last question. People can stay after if they want, but that is last question for the official work session.
Well, it's more, I think the goal of this work session was to sort of, to provide you all with a little bit of guidance on these areas that you've proposed. And hearing that there aren't a lot of questions about these specific projects that you are proposing here, it seems like in general, we're probably all in agreement that these do seem like the appropriate places to focus our attention. I don't know if anyone wants to disagree with me on that. But I would also ask that maybe the team look at the 15th and Gamble and Ingra area and see if there's anything temporary that we can do in that area while the Seward to Glen study and project is.
Yeah, so as we have it, as I have it in my notes, correct me if I'm wrong, but C to 32nd and 36th, we'll look at. Muldoon 6th to DeBar, we'll look at. The the 15th Gamble and Ingra area, see if there's anything. We'll have to look at the data and see what that shows for HSI, for.
It does,
CP.
it is in our top list. It was not on the map just because it's already, it has the Pell in progress.
Okay, so a temporary one to help with, okay, great. Tudor and C Street, the thing was to look at the data to see if we have updated info to see if it's still an area of concern or not. And then the 3rd Avenue, Ingrid to Latouche, that's the only one I'm unclear on. It looks like there's a congressionally designated request in. Do you still want us to submit it as a nomination for HSIP?
I think it wouldn't hurt if we have those, both of those efforts going at the same time. We can always backtrack if we need to, if we get funding. Of course.
Or maybe like sources of funding.
Or is it possible for us to mix and match the
As
funding?
long as we're not supplanting, as long as we're not taking something that's supposed to be funded in another way.
Maybe just coordinating and see what that entails so that there's just some clarity.
Yes, since it's our top location, it's probably a good idea.
That's, I was just curious.
We could nominate it. Assuming additional funding doesn't come.
Is the C 32nd, 36th, is that just on C Street? I know we had talked, I think last year about 36th Avenue. Is there anything on 36 or is that? 'Cause I remember it seemed like that was at the end and there wasn't time to do some requests on 36.
Last year, we were talking about a longer stretch of 36. For each of these, I will go back and look at the specific locations of the crashes to make sure that, you know, some of these lines may not totally encompass the full problem area, to make sure that if it's the intersection versus a block of the road.
So I guess maybe my request is if you can list out, here's what we've talked about in the past. Here's the status of this, like Northern Lights, you know, where is that project? Mountain View Drive, where is that one? You know, the ones on 36 or on Tudor, you know, because I forgot about McKinnis, about the 4Fs. But anyway, just being on the list, here's what we talked about in the past. Here's the status of it. That would be helpful. Because I remember 36 being talked about and I don't remember where that one's at. And I don't need the answer right now. I'm just saying for the attack.
I think with 32nd to 36th C Street, but like really, if I'm remembering correctly, like it's the couplet, like it's both A and C that are sticky in that area. So it would be interesting to maybe think about what's happening both of those. If we were going to address like that block almost.
It was just the red line that showed up as the real hotspot in the data, but since we're there, yes, it's worth kind of looking at that section of the system. I'm trying to scope for you too much.
No, let's not do that.
Hey, any other comments, questions, concerns? Thank you all very much for attending today. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much for DOT for coming out and giving the presentation and having this awesome conversation. And we look forward to the May meetings where we bring stuff forward to you all. Thank you all.